Welcome to our deep dive, going right into the heart of the abortion debate.
Okay.
And we've got a really fascinating source here.
Yeah.
Procon.org laid out, all the arguments, and we are going to unpack those for you today.
That's right.
And we're going to be looking at, a lot of eye-opening statistics,
For sure.
some really powerful quotes,
Absolutely.
and really get into, the meat of this debate.
Yeah, the ethical considerations,
Yeah.
the societal currents that swirl around this topic.
Exactly. So one of the things that I noticed right off the bat from the pro-choice side is the emphasis on safety
Right.
of legal abortion.
Yeah, they argue that choosing a legal route is demonstrably safer than the alternatives.
Right. And they have some data to back that up.
They do. They have some compelling data. A death rate of 0.7 per 100,000 abortions.
Wow.
That's significant.
That's a lot lower than childbirth.
It is significantly lower than the death rate for childbirth, which stands at 9 for 100,000 deliveries.
Yeah.
So you can see right there.
Oh, that's a stark contrast.
There's a big difference.
Yeah. And it's even safer, they say, than some common medical procedures like colonoscopies.
Exactly. And the pro-choice side doesn't stop there. They also point to a potential increase in maternal deaths
Oh, wow.
if abortion bans become more widespread.
Okay.
The argument is that when safe and legal options are taken away, women may resort to unsafe methods, putting their lives at risk.
It's a scary thought.
It is.
Especially when you consider the global statistics, 45% of abortions worldwide are considered unsafe.
Yeah.
Primarily in countries with restrictive laws.
And that's a key point they're trying to make.
Yeah, and then they go beyond just the immediate safety concerns.
Right.
They also raise concerns about the potential impact of abortion bans on women experiencing miscarriages
Yes.
or ectopic pregnancies.
This is a really important point
Yeah.
that sometimes gets overlooked.
Yeah, hadn't really considered that before.
Yeah, so the treatments for these conditions often involve procedures that are very similar
Okay.
to those used in abortions. So under a strict ban, healthcare providers might hesitate
Yeah.
to perform these procedures, even in life-saving situations,
Yeah.
for fear of legal repercussions.
It's a chilling thought.
It is a chilling thought.
Could you even imagine, like, a pharmacist refusing to fill a prescription
Exactly.
for a necessary medication?
That's precisely the kind of chilling effect that pro-choice advocates are worried about.
Wow.
They also bring up the slippery slope argument, suggesting that bans on abortion could eventually extend to certain forms of contraception, like Plan B.
Okay, so now switching gears a bit to the pro-life side.
Okay.
They anchor their argument very firmly in the belief that life begins at conception.
Yes, this is where their entire ethical framework regarding abortion originates.
Right, and for them, this belief renders abortion morally equivalent to murder.
It does. It's a deeply held conviction that shapes their entire perspective on the issue.
Yeah, and Pope Francis, I think, really captured this sentiment powerfully when he said, "It is a human life, period."
Wow. Yeah, that's a very powerful statement.
Yeah, it leaves no room for interpretation.
It doesn't.
And they also extend this argument to say that difficult circumstances, no matter how challenging, don't justify ending a human life, even in its earliest stages.
Right, and they argue that legal abortion fosters a throwaway culture,
Okay.
where the value of life itself is diminished. Cardinal Joseph Tobin described it as a brutalization of the American heart.
Another strong statement.
It is.
Are there any specific examples
Sure.
of how the pro-life side is working to promote this culture of life?
Absolutely.
They're not just against abortion, right?
No, they advocate for increased access to birth control,
Okay.
comprehensive health care, and better sex education as ways to reduce unintended pregnancies in the first place.
So they're tackling the issue from multiple angles,
Exactly.
focusing on both prevention and a shift in societal values.
That's right. And they believe that improving sex education, especially for teens, can empower them to make more responsible choices, leading to fewer unintended pregnancies down the line.
Now, before we move on, I want to highlight something that really struck me when reviewing these arguments.
Like the concept of bodily autonomy,
Yeah.
which is so central to the pro-choice position.
Right.
It's about a woman's inherent right to make decisions about her own body and reproductive health.
It is, and it's a concept that goes beyond just this specific debate.
Oh, really?
It touches on fundamental questions about individual liberty control over our own destinies and the role of government in personal choices.
That's interesting.
Something worth pondering.
Yeah, and then on the other side, the pro-life emphasis on the sanctity of life from the moment of conception raises these profound questions about when personhood truly begins.
Yes.
And what rights, if any, should be granted to a developing fetus.
It challenges us to define what we consider human and deserving of protection.
It really does. And it's interesting to note that while there's this fundamental clash of principles
Yeah,
at the heart of the debate,
at the very core of it.
public opinion polls reveal a more nuanced picture.
They do.
How so?
Well, for instance, support for legal abortion tends to be highest in specific circumstances.
Such as when the woman's life is in danger, or in cases of rape or incest.
So it's not as black and white as it's often portrayed.
Not at all. And on a global scale, you see a wide spectrum of laws and levels of access to abortion, reflecting the diversity of cultural, ethical, and legal frameworks around the world.
All right.
Some international bodies even consider access to safe abortion a fundamental human right. So it demonstrates that the debate extends far beyond our borders and is woven into the fabric of global conversations about human rights and reproductive health care.
This has been quite an eye-opening start to our deep dive.
It has.
I'm curious what's standing out to you so far, anything that particularly resonates or challenges your own perspective.
For me, what's particularly fascinating is how both sides draw upon different sources. Scientific data, religious teachings, philosophical arguments to support their positions.
Interesting.
It highlights how this debate isn't just about facts, but about deeply held values and interpretations of those facts.
Okay, so let's delve a little deeper into some of the specific statistics and studies mentioned in our source.
Okay.
The pro-choice side places a lot of emphasis on the safety of legal abortion and the dangers of restrictive laws. They cited a study predicting that pregnancy-related maternal deaths could rise by 20% in U.S. states with abortion bans.
That's a disturbing statistic, and it underscores the potential consequences of limiting access to safe abortion services. It also raises important questions about healthcare equity and access, especially for women in marginalized communities who may already face significant barriers to quality healthcare.
Right. And they also highlighted the fact that globally, 45% of abortions are considered unsafe, with the majority occurring in countries with restrictive abortion laws.
Right.
It seems to support their claim that bans don't necessarily eliminate abortions,
Yeah,
but may drive them underground, creating a much more dangerous situation for women.
that's a critical takeaway. It shifts the conversation beyond the moral debate and forces us to consider the practical realities and potential public health implications of restrictive policies.
Now let's turn our attention to the Turnaway study, which followed women who were denied abortions. This study is often cited by the pro-choice side to demonstrate the long-term consequences of being denied access to this procedure.
Right. This was a landmark study providing valuable insights into the ripple effects of these decisions, not just on the woman herself, but on her family and overall well-being.
So what did they find?
The findings were quite significant. The women who were denied abortions were more likely to experience economic hardship. They saw increases in poverty, lower credit scores, and a higher likelihood of facing debt.
Wow.
So it really paints a picture of the financial strain that can result from being forced to carry an unintended pregnancy to term.
And the study didn't just focus on the economic impact, did it?
No, it also looked at the broader health and well-being of these women.
Okay.
They found that years after being denied an abortion, these women were more likely to report poorer physical and mental health compared to the control group.
Wow.
So again,
That's heavy.
it's a reminder that these decisions have very real and lasting consequences on women's lives.
Yeah, and it raises questions about, whether forcing someone to carry a pregnancy against their will could be considered a form of psychological harm.
To a complex ethical question.
Yeah, and the study's findings extended beyond the women themselves.
They did. They also looked at the children of women who were denied abortions and found they were more likely to live below the poverty line and experience developmental challenges.
So the impact can cascade down through generations.
They can.
Potentially perpetuating cycles of poverty and disadvantage.
And that's a key point that the pro-choice side is trying to make.
Right.
They're using this study to make a case for the broader societal impact of access to abortion.
Right. So it moves the conversation beyond individual choice and forces us to consider the potential economic and social ramifications of restrictive policies.
Exactly.
And it begs the question, if access to abortion can mitigate some of these negative outcomes, is it a matter of individual liberty or a matter of public health and social responsibility?
That's the question.
That is the question. It's a lot to unpack.
It is.
And I think it's a good point to pause and reflect on what we've covered so far.
Take a moment and consider what's resonating with you. What questions are popping up in your mind? What connections are you making to your own understanding of this issue?
We'll be right back to delve deeper into the pro-life arguments and explore their vision of a culture of life.
This concept of a culture of life is really at the heart of the pro-life argument, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about fostering a society that values and protects all human life, from conception to natural death.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's about more than just opposing abortion. It's about creating a world where every human life is cherished and nurtured.
And a key part of that is ensuring that women facing unintended pregnancies feel supported and empowered to choose life.
Okay.
This means advocating for policies that provide a robust safety net, things like affordable healthcare, quality childcare, and financial assistance for struggling families.
So it's about creating a society where women aren't forced to choose between their own well-being and the life of their child.
Precisely, they believe that these kinds of supportive measures can help to reduce the number of abortions without resorting to legal bans.
It's a proactive approach focusing on addressing the underlying societal and economic conditions that can sometimes make choosing life feel impossible.
Right, and this idea of a culture of life also extends to promoting adoption as a compassionate and ethical alternative to abortion.
Okay.
They highlight the countless stories of adopted children who have thrived in loving homes, and the profound joy adoption has brought to both adoptive parents and children.
It's about creating a system where every child has a chance to flourish, regardless of the circumstances of their birth.
Exactly. And a lot of pro-life advocates also point to advancements in medical technology that have made it possible to treat high-risk pregnancies successfully
Right.
and save the lives of both mothers and babies.
Okay.
They argue that these advancements further reduce the need for abortion, even in cases where the mother's health is at risk.
So they're pushing back on the argument that abortion is sometimes necessary to save the mother's life.
Yes, they believe that in almost all cases, both lives can be saved with proper medical care and support.
This pro-life perspective really challenges us to think differently about the issue, doesn't it?
It does.
It's not just about opposing something, it's about actively building a society that supports life in all its forms.
It certainly does, and it raises a lot of questions. For example, how do we balance individual rights with societal responsibilities? What role should government play in shaping our moral values?
These are complex questions without easy answers. It's interesting to consider how the pro-life emphasis on a culture of life connects to broader debates about social justice, economic equality, and the role of government in our lives.
Absolutely. It's a conversation that goes far beyond just the abortion debate itself, touching on fundamental questions about the kind of society we want to create.
And speaking of broader societal questions, one thing that stood out to me in the pro-choice arguments was the emphasis on the economic impact of denying women access to abortion. They cited the Turnaway study, which found that women who were denied abortions were more likely to experience poverty and financial hardship.
It's a sobering finding, and it raises concerns about the potential for restrictive abortion laws to exacerbate existing economic inequalities. It forces us to consider the economic realities faced by many women, particularly those in low-income communities who may already be struggling to make ends meet.
Exactly. Denying access to abortion doesn't just impact the woman's body. It can have far-reaching consequences for her financial stability, her career prospects, her ability to provide for her family.
And this economic argument intersects with the broader conversation about women's rights and equality.
Okay.
The pro-choice side argues that access to abortion is essential for women to fully participate in society and achieve economic independence. They point to the historical reality that women have often been denied opportunities because of pregnancy and motherhood.
So it's about breaking down those barriers and ensuring that women have the same freedoms and opportunities as men to pursue their goals and dreams.
Precisely, it's about ensuring that women have control over their own bodies and their own futures.
This raises some interesting questions, doesn't it? If access to abortion is seen as essential for women's equality, does restricting access constitute a form of discrimination? Does it perpetuate traditional gender roles that confine women to the domestic sphere?
It's a complex and multifaceted issue, and it's important to acknowledge that the emotional impact of abortion can be profound and varies greatly from person to person.
Okay.
Some women may experience a sense of relief after an abortion, while others may grapple with feelings of sadness, guilt, or regret.
So it's crucial to provide support and counseling for women navigating these complex emotions, regardless of their reasons for choosing abortion.
Absolutely. And this emotional aspect of the debate often gets lost in the heated political rhetoric.
Right.
It's a reminder that these aren't just abstract philosophical arguments. They're deeply personal decisions with real-life consequences.
Now let's delve into some of the ethical considerations at the heart of this debate. One of the central questions is the moral status of the fetus. When does a fetus become a person with rights? Is it at conception, later in pregnancy, or at birth?
That's a question that has vexed philosophers and theologians for centuries.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer, and different perspectives offer varying viewpoints.
The pro-life side, as we discussed, believes firmly that life begins at conception, therefore granting the fetus full personhood and the right to life from that moment forward.
Right, and their ethical framework rests on this foundational belief.
Hmm.
For them, any deliberate termination of that life is morally wrong.
The pro-choice side often takes a different approach, arguing that while a fertilized egg has the potential to develop into a human being, it doesn't possess the same rights or moral status as a born individual.
Right, they tend to draw a distinction between biological life and personhood, suggesting that personhood emerges gradually during pregnancy or at birth.
Okay.
They may argue that personhood requires certain characteristics like consciousness, self-awareness, or
Yeah.
the ability to experience the world independently.
So this difference in defining personhood is a major point of divergence between the two sides, isn't it? It shapes their entire ethical framework and how they approach the issue of abortion.
It certainly does. And
Okay.
it's important to note that even within the pro-life movement, there's a range of views on when exactly life begins.
Well, interesting.
Some may point to the moment of conception, while others may emphasize a later stage, such as when the heart starts beating or when the fetus becomes viable outside the womb.
This lack of a clear consensus even within the pro-life movement speaks to the complexity of the issue, doesn't it?
It does, and it highlights the challenges of defining the beginning of life in a way that satisfies everyone. The pro-choice side often uses this lack of consensus to argue that these are ultimately moral and philosophical questions, not scientific ones.
Okay.
And therefore, the government should be in the business of imposing one particular view on everyone.
It's about individual freedom of conscience and the right to make decisions based on one's own beliefs and values.
Right. And it's also about recognizing that pregnancy and childbirth aren't just abstract concepts. They're deeply personal experiences with significant physical, emotional, and financial implications.
And those implications can vary greatly depending on the individual woman's circumstances.
Exactly. The pro-choice side argues that reducing the entire abortion debate to a single question of when life begins ignores the complex realities faced by women and fails to account for the full range of considerations involved.
So it's about respecting women's autonomy and recognizing their capacity to make informed decisions about their own lives and bodies.
And this idea of bodily autonomy is really at the core of the pro-choice argument,
Oh.
isn't it? They see it as a fundamental human right that applies to everyone regardless of gender.
Absolutely. It's about the right to make decisions about one's own body, including reproductive choices without interference from the government or other external forces.
Right.
They argue that forcing a woman to carry an unwanted pregnancy to term violates this fundamental right and constitutes a form of bodily coercion.
They also point to the inherent risks associated with pregnancy and childbirth.
Huh?
It's not without its physical, emotional, and financial burdens. They argue that women should have the right to weigh those risks and make choices that align with their own individual circumstances and values.
It's about recognizing that pregnancy and childbirth are not one-size-fits-all experiences, and what's right for one woman may not be right for another.
Right, and they often draw parallels to other medical procedures, arguing that if individuals have the right to refuse life-saving treatment, they should also have the right to choose an abortion. It's about consistency in upholding the principle of bodily autonomy.
That's an interesting comparison. It frames abortion as a medical decision that should be made between a woman and her doctor, free from government intrusion.
Exactly, and this emphasis on medical expertise and the doctor-patient relationship is another key aspect of the pro-choice argument. They argue that legal and safe abortion is essential for protecting women's health. They point to the history of back-alley abortions and the dangers associated with self-induced abortions when safe and legal options are unavailable.
So they're not just advocating for choice, they're advocating for safe and accessible health care for all women.
Precisely.
Mhm.
And they often highlight the necessity of abortion in certain cases, such as when the woman's life is in danger, when the fetus has severe abnormalities, or in cases of rape or incest.
Okay.
They argue that denying abortion in these circumstances can cause significant physical, emotional, and psychological harm to both the woman and her family.
They're pushing back against the idea that abortion is always a frivolous or selfish choice.
Yeah.
They're reminding us that there are real-life situations where carrying a pregnancy to term can have devastating consequences.
And this argument often connects to the broader concept of reproductive justice, which goes beyond just the right to abortion. It encompasses a wider set of rights and freedoms related to reproductive health and decision-making, including access to contraception, affordable health care, comprehensive sex education, and the freedom to choose whether or not to become a parent.
It's about recognizing the systemic barriers that can prevent certain communities, particularly low-income women and women of color, from exercising these rights and freedoms.
Right. It's about ensuring that all women, regardless of their background or circumstances, have the power to control their own bodies and their own reproductive destinies.
This deep dive is really starting to reveal the layers of complexity within this debate, isn't it?
It is.
It's not just about two opposing viewpoints. It's about a whole network of interconnected issues: personal autonomy, medical ethics, social justice, gender equality, and the role of government in our lives.
It certainly is, and it's a debate that's likely to continue for generations to come.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to circle back to a point you made earlier about the emotional impact of abortion. The pro-life side often argues that abortion can lead to regret, guilt, and a whole range of negative psychological effects. What does the research say about that?
Well, it's important to note that there's a lot of debate and conflicting information surrounding this topic.
Okay.
Some studies suggest that a small percentage of women may experience negative emotional responses after an abortion, but the vast majority do not.
So the idea of post-abortion syndrome, which is often cited by the pro-life side, isn't really a scientifically valid concept.
That's right. It's not a recognized medical diagnosis,
Mm.
and many researchers argue that the studies claiming to demonstrate widespread negative psychological effects are flawed and don't meet rigorous scientific standards.
So it's important to approach these claims with a critical eye and to be wary of misinformation or emotionally charged rhetoric.
Exactly, and it's crucial to remember that women are capable of making informed decisions about their own bodies and their own mental health. They deserve to be trusted and supported, not judged or shamed.
It's a powerful reminder that this debate is ultimately about real people making difficult decisions in often challenging circumstances. We'll be right back to explore the pro-life arguments in greater depth, examining their concerns about the sanctity of life, the potential harms of abortion, and their vision for a society that truly embraces a culture of life.
The pro-life stance on abortion, as we've seen, is so deeply rooted in that belief that life begins at conception. For them, the developing fetus is not just a clump of cells,
Right.
but a distinct human being deserving of the same rights and protections as any other person.
It's a perspective that really challenges us to confront some pretty profound questions.
It does.
What does it mean to be human?
Right.
When does personhood begin?
Yeah.
What are our obligations to those we consider most vulnerable?
These are big questions.
They're big questions, and the pro-life side often argues that abortion is not only morally wrong,
Yes.
is also harmful to women,
Right.
both physically and emotionally.
Yeah, they point to studies that suggest a link between abortion and an increased risk of certain health problems.
Okay.
Although those studies are often disputed and the scientific consensus on this issue remains unclear.
Right, and they also often emphasize the emotional toll
Yes.
that abortion can take,
They do.
using the term post-abortion syndrome to describe a cluster of negative psychological effects, including regret, guilt, and depression.
Hmm.
But as we discussed earlier, post-abortion syndrome is not a recognized medical diagnosis.
Right.
And many researchers argue that the vast majority of women do not experience long-term psychological harm after an abortion.
Right. It's a complex and sensitive issue,
Mm.
and it's important to be cautious about making generalizations or promoting unsubstantiated claims.
Yeah.
But regardless of the scientific debate, the pro-life side firmly believes that abortion is a traumatic experience that can leave lasting scars on women's hearts and minds.
And this belief really informs their approach to counseling and support for women facing unintended pregnancies. They often advocate for alternatives to abortion, such as adoption, and they run crisis pregnancy centers that offer resources and support to pregnant women.
They believe that women deserve to be informed about all of their options and to receive compassionate care and support, regardless of their decision.
Right, so it's not just about opposing abortion. It's
No.
about working to create a society where abortion is unthinkable because women have the resources and support they need to choose life.
Exactly, and this vision of a culture of life extends beyond just the issue of abortion. It encompasses a broader set of values and beliefs, including a commitment to social justice, economic equality, and the protection of the most vulnerable members of our society. They believe that a true culture of life values all human life from conception to natural death and works to create a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
It's a really compelling vision and one that I think resonates with a lot of people, even those who may not identify as strictly pro-life.
It's a reminder that this debate is not just about abstract principles. It's about our fundamental values as a society and the kind of world we want to create for ourselves and future generations.
So after this deep dive, into the complexities of this issue, where do we go from here?
Right.
We've explored the arguments, we've unpacked the data, we've confronted some challenging ethical questions.
Yeah. It's a lot to process, isn't it?
It is.
And there are no easy answers. But I think that's the beauty of this kind of exploration.
Yeah.
It's not about arriving at a definitive conclusion. It's about engaging with these complex issues in a thoughtful and nuanced way.
It's about listening to different perspectives, challenging our own assumptions, and ultimately forming our own informed opinions.
Exactly. And it's about remembering that this debate is not just a theoretical exercise. It has real-life consequences for individuals and families.
Yeah.
It's about respecting the dignity of all involved, even those with whom we disagree.
This deep dive has certainly given me a lot to think about. I'm curious what's resonated most with you. What questions or insights are you taking away from this exploration?
For me, what stands out is the realization that this debate is not just about abortion. It's about so much more. It's about our understanding of personhood, our beliefs about the role of government, and our fundamental values as a society. It's a conversation that we need to continue having with respect, empathy, and a willingness to listen to each other.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the heart of the abortion debate. We hope it sparked your curiosity, challenged your assumptions, and left you with more questions than answers because ultimately that's what this journey of learning and understanding is all about.